Welcome back to Speak Your Truth, Poetry Podcast. Welcome back to Speak Your Truth, Poetry Podcast. I'm truly glad, as always, that you guys are here, not just listening, but choosing to pause long enough to be present with yourself. In our last episode, we sat beneath the heavy skies of depression. We named the weight, we honored the silence. Today, we turn toward a different kind of storm. Anxiety. Anxiety doesn't always arrive loud. Often, it slips in quietly. A tightening in the chest, a restless thought that refuses to settle, a sense that something is wrong, even when nothing is visibly falling apart. It hums beneath conversations. It lingers in still moments. It whispers questions you do not invite, and then waits for you to answer them. It's not a medical conversation. There will be no diagnosis here, no instructions to fix yourself. What we are doing instead is listening to that whisper, and answering it with something steady, something kind, and something brave. Poetry gives us a language for what anxiety cannot clearly explain. It lets us slow the moment down. It gives shape to the invisible tension we carry and reminds us that fear doesn't get the final word. So as we move forward, I invite you to breathe a little deeper. You don't need to be calm. You don't need to be fearless. All you need to do is stay. This episode is about the quiet exchange between worry and courage, about the voice that trembles and the voice that answers anyway, about learning that even when anxiety whispers, you still get to choose what you believe. Take this moment to yourself. You are safe here. Let's jump into it. Anxiety is often invisible. To the outside world, you might look calm. You might even look strong. But inside, your thoughts move like a river after heavy rain, fast, loud, and impossible to ignore. You can arrive as a quickened heartbeat, a shallow breath you didn't notice you were holding, a mind that jumps from what if to what then before you finish the first thought. Sometimes it hits all at once, a sudden rush that floods your body with urgency. Other times it's quieter, a slow, steady current that never seems to stop moving, even when you're exhausted. Anxiety doesn't always announce itself as fear. Sometimes it wears the mask of preparation. Sometimes it calls itself responsibility. Sometimes it sounds like your own voice, convincing you that you're simply being careful, when in truth, you're bracing for impact that may never come. And that's what makes it so difficult to explain. How do you describe a storm that lives inside your chest? How do you tell someone that nothing is wrong, and yet everything feels urgent? Naming anxiety isn't giving it more power. It's the opposite. It's acknowledging what is already present instead of letting it run unchecked in the dark. When you name it, you stop fighting shadows. You stop asking yourself why you can't just relax. You stop mistaking a natural response for personal failure. Naming anxiety is like standing on the shore and saying, I see the tide. You're not the water. You're not the current. You're the one who notices it moving. And in that noticing, something important happens. The grip loosens, just a little. The noise softens, just enough to hear yourself think. Anxiety may be part of your experience, but it's not the sum of who you are. It's a signal, not a sentence. A wave, not the ocean. As we continue, hold on to this truth. You are allowed to name what you feel without being consumed by it. Awareness is not weakness. It's the first quiet act of courage. Poetry thrives in spaces where ordinary language stumbles. When sentences fall apart, poems remain. They don't rush to explain. They don't demand clarity. They simply sit with what's real. A poem can hold a racing mind without judgment. It doesn't ask you to calm down first. It meets you exactly where you are. Breath uneven, thoughts tangled, heart alert for danger that has no name. Line breaks become places to breathe. Natural pauses where your body can catch up to itself. Metaphors become companions, offering images when feelings refuse to be defined. You may not know how to describe your anxiety, but you might recognize it as a storm, a locked room, a flickering light, or a tightening rope. And suddenly, you're not alone with it. When you read or write a poem while anxious, you create a rhythm stronger than the chaos. Your breath begins to follow the lines. Your thoughts slow, not because they were forced to, but because something steadier has entered the room. Poetry doesn't silence anxiety. It gives it a container. It reminds the mind that it does not have to sprint endlessly. There is a shape here, a cadence, a beginning and an end. Even if only for a moment, the poem becomes an anchor, not something that drags you down, but something that keeps you from drifting too far. A point of contact with the present. A reminder that you are still here, still breathing, still capable of observing instead of being swept away. And maybe that moment is brief. Maybe the anxiety returns as soon as the page turns or the poem ends. That's okay. The point is not permanence. The point is proof. Proof that calm is possible. Proof that your mind can slow. proof that you can create something steady even while the water moves beneath you. Poetry becomes a mirror, not to magnify fear, but to reflect truth. You are not broken. You are responding. And within you exists the same rhythm you hear in these lines. In the next moments, we'll step into a poem together. There's no right way to listen. Let the words, like I say, meet you where they land. Let them do what poems do best. Hold you. This next piece is for anyone whose heart is beating too fast tonight. For anyone lying awake, counting worries instead of sleep. For anyone who feels the body bracing, even though the room is still. You don't need to understand this poem. You don't need to analyze it or hold on to every word. Let it move at the pace it chooses. Let your breath follow where it can. This isn't a poem meant to conquer anxiety. It's a poem meant to sit beside it. The night is a room of restless clocks. Each tick a question I cannot answer. But here, inside the small cave of my chest, breath moves like a patient tide. In, the soft ocean. Out, the same returning. Worry tries to build a storm, but this tide knows its own slow law. One inhale, one exhale, and the dark begins to listen. Let that final line linger. Notice what your body is doing right now. You may not feel calm, but if you're breathing, you're already doing something right. Sometimes courage is not a loud decision. Sometimes it's simply staying with the breath long enough to remember you are still here. In this moment, I want to offer a few simple practices to pair with poetry. Not solutions, not fixes, just small, steady ways to return to yourself when anxiety pulls you away. The first is one-line grounding. Choose a single line that feels calm or true. It can be borrowed from a poem you love or something you write yourself. Nothing elaborate, just a sentence that feels safe to say out loud. Whisper it slowly while you breathe. Let the words move in rhythm with your inhale and your exhale. This isn't about making the fear disappear. It's about reminding your nervous system that you're here and that you are allowed to slow down. The second practice is 5 sense touching. Anxiety lives in the future. This practice gently brings you back to the present. Write a short stanza or a few lines, naming one thing you can see, one thing you can hear, one thing you can touch, one thing you can taste, and one thing you can smell. Keep it simple, keep it honest. There's no wrong answer here. The goal isn't beauty, but attention. The third practice is a timed free write. Set a timer for 3 minutes. Give yourself permission to let the anxious thoughts spill onto the page without editing, correcting, or judging them. You don't need to make sense. You don't need to be kind. You don't need to reread what you wrote. This is simply about giving the noise somewhere to go, so it doesn't have to echo endlessly inside you. These practices are not cures. They won't erase anxiety from your life, but they can create space, a pause, a small clearing where you can stand without being swept away. Think of them as doorways. You don't have to walk through all of them. You don't even have to stay long. Sometimes just touching the door handle is enough to remind yourself that the present moment is still available to you. And that in itself is a quiet form of courage. Anxiety often tells us we're alone. It speaks in isolation. It convinces us that no one else could possibly understand what we're carrying or how hard it is just to get through the day. But every time you share even a fragment of your experience, that illusion begins to crack. A poem, a sentence spoken quietly, a truth offered without explanation or apology. Connection doesn't require a full confession. It doesn't ask you to tell the whole story. Sometimes it begins with one honest line, spoken into the open, without knowing who will hear it. And someone will. Someone listening will recognize themselves in your words. They'll feel that subtle shift, that quiet relief that says, it's not just me. In that moment, something changes. Your courage becomes a bridge, not because you had all the answers, but because you were willing to be seen with armor. And on the other side of that bridge, someone else finds the courage to name their own experience. This is how poetry moves beyond the page. This is how stories soften the sharp edges of anxiety. They remind us that fear loses strength when it is shared, even briefly, even imperfectly. You don't have to be loud to be brave. You don't have to be certain. You only have to be honest enough to let your words exist in the world. Connection doesn't erase anxiety, but it does remind us that we don't have to carry it alone. And sometimes, that shared weight is enough to steady the breath. If your words reach even one person, that is not small. That is courage multiplied. Thank you for joining me for episode 3 of Speak Your Truth, a poetry podcast. Thank you for staying through the quiet moments, for listening with an open heart, even if your mind felt restless along the way. If you're carrying anxiety today, I hope these words meet you with softness rather than pressure. Nothing you felt while listening was wrong. Nothing needed to be fixed. Sometimes being present is enough. Anxiety may still be there when this episode ends. That doesn't mean this time was wasted. Every pause you allowed, every breath you noticed, every moment you stayed instead of fleeing mattered. You don't need to outrun the storm. You don't need to silence every fear. Your breath is already doing the work of keeping you here, moment by moment, even on the hard days. If it helps, take one line from today with you, write it down, whisper it later when the noise returns. Let it remind you that calm is not something you earn, it's something you return to. Thank you for giving yourself these minutes. Thank you for choosing reflection over avoidance, even briefly. This space will be here when you need it again. And remember, stay grounded, stay grateful, and always, always speak your truth. Peace out.